If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment. For more videos like this, what is the scariest, most unsettling experience of your life? Paranormal or not? 15 years old. I had just got home from work, so I went to my bedroom to change out of my work clothes and get ready for bed. I'm in the middle of undressing when I look to my bedroom window to catch my reflection. And I see a man's face. I dropped to the floor and turned off the lights, scrambling to get dressed, still watching the window. The face is gone, but I'm still watching. Then a fucking camera. No face, just a camera pointed at me sitting on the floor. I bolt from my room and tell my mom and brother. My brother went outside, and our ladder from the backyard was lying there. But nobody around. Couldn't sleep for a year after that, just stared at that window. Haven't thought about that in years. When I was about 7 to 8 years old, my family rented a house close to the beach for a week. The drive wasn't very long, but as an 8-year-old, by the time we got there, I really had to feed the porcelain stallion a brown bone. We pull into the driveway and are met by a middle-aged woman who owned the house and showed us the place and told us about the town and what to do, etc. My first instinct is to find the bathroom, so I ask, and she tells me it's the second door on the right after the kitchen. Go inside and open the bathroom door to an older guy just standing there looking at me. I kinda duck my head down, say sorry, and went back outside. They noticed I was back pretty fast, and I told them there was someone in the bathroom already. That's when it got weird. The lady looked at me confused and said there's no one else in the house. I explained that I definitely saw someone in that bathroom. After searching the house, we find no evidence of anyone else being there. After a while, the lady told us her dad owned the house and lived there and recently passed away. She inherited the house and wasn't sure what to do with it, so she started renting it out. Pretty sure I saw that dude. Long story, there's a road in my city called Hicks Road. It's this windy, mountain road with pretty much no lights and a lot of forest. Mostly teenagers go there to bang or to smoke weed in the area. There are a lot of urban legends around the area, too, mostly involving albino communities and scaring away people because they grow weed there. Not really sure. But anyways, my friend and I are driving on Hicks Road at night back in high school, just talking and sharing stories. We did this regularly. On the way back down from the mountain, heading back home, this silver SUV starts tailgating us like crazy and flashing his lights. We were going pretty fast already, but figured he or she was a local and knew the roads better, so I told her to pull to the side, and she did. But then the SUV pulled behind us and stopped, so I told her fuck that, and we gunned it down the road. We sped down the 2-lane road dead center, trying to get away from this car that was flashing its lights and tailgating us like crazy. We even checked the backseat for paranoia and remembering other urban legends. Anyways, we get to city streets and the car runs through 3 red lights to keep up with us, and at some point speeds ahead of us, cuts into our lane, and then brakes to try to get us to brake or crash into him. I start calling 911, but then the car pulls to the side of us, I think sees that I'm on the phone, and just leaves. I wish I got the license plate, but my head was thinking more to get away than anything. Very freaky experience. Not sure what would have happened. I was probably no older than 8 or 9 and with my Cub Scouts, Junior Boy Scouts, troop. We were camping at Red Top Mountain in GA near Lake Allatoona. I cannot pinpoint the exact camping location from an aerial map view, but if I were there on foot, I could find the exact area where this happened. It was maybe the 3rd or 4th night and probably around 10 p.m. or 11 p.m. My memory is a little fuzzy as to what the time exactly was, and it may have not been as late since I was little, and everything during the night when it was dark felt like 10 p.m. or midnight. Anyway, there was this massive electrical storm or thunderstorm. But essentially the wind was blowing like crazy and the sky kept lighting up with lightning, but there was no rain. I think rain was on its way, but not quite there. We, the other kids in the troop, and I, decided to go down to the lakeshore by following a path directly from the campsite. It was the path that we took that summer when we wanted to take our canoes/kayaks out to the lake and play in the water. Once we got to the lakeshore, I remember feeling a very large sense of dread. I guess this could possibly be explained by the electrical source, but considering what followed, I'm not sure. All of the kids, including myself, were terrified and hiding underneath the trees and not going completely to the shore. The water had one hell of a tide since it was so windy and everything was just incredibly ominous. Then, on the next lightning flash, I remember seeing amongst the tree line maybe 100 feet from us on the other side of the cove, there was this enormous, like 50 feet tall, gray thing standing in the trees. I remember seeing a long neck and a large head, and it was moving, walking, but with long legs and very unnaturally, in a way to try and mimic the tree swaying in the wind. I know what some of you might say, It was just a tree moving in the wind, but this thing was moving on the shoreline and not in the actual trees. It was like going for a nightly stroll by the water. Naturally, we all metaphorically shit ourselves. Hopefully, no one was verbal about soiling their clothing if they actually did, and hightailed it out of there and told our parents at the campsite. Of course, the parents all laughed it off and gave the sort of comments like funny kids or ooh, spooky. But we were all genuinely terrified. It was also on the same trip, but I remember seeing a bunch of animals late at night when I went to go to the bathroom in the outhouse. They were always stalking around our campsite and never really ran off when I got near them / accidentally walked too close. I always felt really uncomfortable and got a huge sense of dread whenever I saw a dog, probably was a coyote, because it kept staring at me like it knew me or somehow knew something about me. It stuck around the most for a few nights, but we never saw it during the day. Sorry about the long post, but I've never actually shared this story with anyone until just now, and it all came spilling out of my memory. I had many weird experiences growing up, and while I've grown skeptical in my old age, some things have stuck with me that I cannot explain. When I was around 10, we moved to a small farming town about an hour away from where I grew up. The house I grew up in had a number of strange things happen inside of it, and while I've detailed a few of them before, the stuff I saw in my new house was unsettling. The house was moved to was an older farmhouse and belonged to a retired farmer. Weird layout, and pretty old-fashioned but functional. The important detail is our kitchen opened up into a small den-type room that connected the master bedroom, main living room and small office. From the kitchen table, you could see into the living room through a French door that was mostly glass. One morning I was eating breakfast with my brother and mom, and I was facing the living room. My mom was facing me. It was around 9 a.m. and bright outside, so I could clearly see into the room as it had a huge bay window and was east-facing. As I was eating, I saw what looked like a small hunched-over shadow person scurry across the room and go out of my sight as it passed the door. It happened so fast that I must have been noticeably startled, and my mom questioned why I looked scared. I told her what I saw, and she admitted to having seen it a few times. Over the next month I saw it 2 more times. Another time in the living room, and the last time I saw it was outside. Waiting for the bus, on a bright sunny winter day. My brother and I were waiting, and as the bus got closer to us, I saw this black mass scurry from behind the bus and move across the road only to disappear into the ditch. This was maybe about 50 to 70 meters away, but these are empty fields on a bright morning. I didn't mistake it for anything else, and there was nowhere for it to disappear to if it was an animal. My mom eventually put a cross in the living room and asked whatever was there to leave us in peace and stop making itself known. A number of other little weird things continued to occur in that house, but I did not see any more shadow people. This is the story of how a creepy encounter with a scary man at a harbor cafe saved me from something even more terrifying. It was in the autumn of 1994 and I was 19 years old. At the time, my dad had been working for almost 6 months abroad, and I was planning a surprise visit. My dad and I have always been close. I am an only child, and my mother died of cancer when I was still a baby. So it was just my dad and I, really, a tiny little family, but he made up for it by being the most awesome parent ever. Now that I wasn't a little kid anymore, I appreciated that more and more. I had booked the ticket and was ready to go. It was going to be great fun to surprise him with a visit. I had to take the ferry though, and I had just gotten my driving license and felt really unhappy about having to drive my little car on board the ferry, and decided to not bring a car at all, and just rent one once I got there. Having time to spend, I decided to have coffee at a nearby cafe since I was early and they hadn't started letting people onto the ferry just yet. At the cafe there were lots of truck drivers, and I soon realized I was the only woman there. One man, a 40-ish bloke with ice blue eyes and tattoos all over, was eyeing me from across the room. Something about him made my skin crawl. I got up to leave, feeling suddenly very uncomfortable, and to my utter horror he followed. What do I do now? I asked myself. This was before everyone owned a cell phone, I might add. I decided to try and look busy and maybe he would leave me alone. So I pulled out my ticket and tried to look like I was reading it carefully, when he suddenly snatched it from my hand and said, "I'm on the same boat. I'll have hours of your company then." How lovely, in a voice that was an absurd combination of jovial flattery and hidden hostility. I felt it very strongly that if I got on that boat, with this man who now knew my booking details, I'd be in grave danger. I can't explain why the feeling was so overwhelming, but it was, and I decided there and then to not get on the boat. The ticket had been cheap anyway, I could get on the next one instead. I hid in the ladies' room until I knew the ferry had left, and then I went to rebook my ticket. The story could have ended here, a creepy encounter with a stalkerish man, but it doesn't. I was right in the assumption that getting on that ferry would have been unbelievably dangerous. Have you figured it out yet? The date was September 28, 1994, the name of the ship was MS Estonia, and that cold night she sank in the Baltic Sea, taking 852 people with her, resulting in the worst ferry catastrophe to strike Sweden to this day. I still recall that day with horror, and wonder what would have happened if this creepy man had not taken an interest in me? If I had not listened to my instinct and gotten on board instead of waiting for the next boat. Would I have been among the survivors? Or would my dad have seen my name on the list of lives lost in the Baltic Sea? I was on a camping trip with my friends, 3 of us. Towards the end of the day, we found a sweet spot, along a ridge line, to harbor for the night. 2 of us has a tent while my other friend had a hammock and some ground sheets as shelter, he likes it that way. At around 2 to 3 a.m., it was pouring heavily and I was a little concerned with my friend and started calling out for him, wanting him to come into my tent for shelter. I yelled numerous times but to no response. Thinking that the rain must have drowned out my calls, I got out of my tent and went out to him. When I reached him, he looked terrified. I asked if he wanted to come into my tent for shelter, he turned it down. He insisted on staying put at where he was. Puzzled, I went back to my tent and slept. The next day, I sensed that something was amiss and my instinct told me not to question. We continued with the trip for another night. After the trip and settled down, I asked my friend about what had happened that night. This is what he told me. It was pouring and I heard you calling for me. I walked over and saw that both of you were inside. Thinking that I must have misheard, I went back to my hammock. And when I heard the voice again, I knew it wasn't a voice in my head. I shouted back, thinking that it was one of you guys, but the voice kept calling for my name. I went back again, only to find the both of you sleeping. And this time, more and more voices are calling out for my name. And when you came over, I was totally freaked out. Okay, lots of stories from my mom's super haunted, built-in 1800s, house. This is just one. Background: after I gave birth to my first child, my husband, baby, and I stayed at my parents' house for a week, until after baby's 1-week checkup. 2 days after giving birth was a stormy, thunder and lightning, pouring rain night. My dog was sick and we had to put him down that night, but I was so hormonal and still healing from giving birth, so my husband took him with my sister for company. My dad and the younger sisters were at a church get-together. I'm huddled with another sister and my mother in my mom's bed cooing over the baby, trying to stay happy for him and not think about what's happening, when I have to pee. This was a difficult process at the time, and everything I needed was located in the first-level bathroom. So I trudged down there, and as I'm doing my thing I suddenly hear my baby screaming, coming from the giant vent in the floor. Super loud, I mean over the sounds of wind and rain and thunder. I panic and rush myself through the cleanup, climb the stairs as fast as I can, and he's not crying anymore. Why was he crying? What happened? I asked. He wasn't crying. He has been happy, we were just laughing at his smile even. Replied my sister. My mother and sister were both looking at me like I'm crazy. No, I heard him through the vent. He was screaming. Clear as day. No, he wasn't, and that vent only leads to the basement. Couple weeks later my mom comes back from the library with a book about the house. A baby boy from the first family had lived there. He became ill and died suddenly in the house. I shit you not. Maybe this was a doppelganger or a glitch in the matrix, but this really spooked my spaghetti. So I was 9 years old, playing video games in the living room while my mom was taking a nap upstairs, early home from work. Suddenly I heard my mom calling me. I thought she needed help, so I made my way upstairs, but then I heard her voice downstairs. I went back to the living room and looked around, thinking she was playing a joke on me, when I saw the basement door ajar and her head poking out of the open door. What do you want, Mom? Just come down here. Yeah, but what do you need? Just come down here, I need to show you something. When I was 9 I was a bit of a wuss and wouldn't watch horror movies. If I did, I would have known this was instant death. I walked towards the basement and saw her head move behind the door and move back into the basement. I opened the door more and stood at the top of the stairs. The light switch was at the bottom of the stairs, so I was fucked 6 ways till Sunday. I saw a figure in the darkness moving away from me, and something just hit me that something wasn't right. Then I heard what sounded like a growling bear getting his balls caught in a vice and knew that it was my mom snoring. Then I heard a high-pitched voice from in the dark saying, "Come on down. Look." And it sounded nothing like my mom, so I freaked out and bolted upstairs, slammed the basement door and raced up to my mom's room where she was asleep. I told her about it and she sounded freaked out too. Not to me, but to my sister. Her husband and her had just had their first child a few months prior. My brother-in-law was working the graveyard shift at his job as my sister stayed home taking care of my nephew. Around 2 a.m., she heard loud knocking on her back door. She went to go check it out and saw a lady banging on the door asking for my sister to let her in. The lady told my sister that her husband had just beat her down the street and was looking for her. My sister was hesitant to let her in since she had a newborn in the house and didn't want to interfere. She told the lady that the best she could do was call the police for her. The lady told my sister to not call the police and to let her in. This is where my sister got suspicious. She went to get her phone and called 911. When she went back to the door, the lady was gone. The police arrived a few minutes later and they told my sister that the same situation happened a few streets down. Apparently the couple would do this act to get into people's homes. I'm sure this is very common, but having it almost happen to my sister and my nephew just creeps me out. Some real Clockwork Orange shit. Not as scary as others, but creeped me out nonetheless. I was out of town on business and my security camera went off in the middle of the night. Now I'm half asleep in a hotel hundreds of miles away from home, and I don't believe in ghosts, so my first thought was that someone was shining a flashlight in the house to case it. Not knowing what else to do and not wanting to call the police and look foolish, I used the two-way sound on the camera to yell, "Get the fuck away from the house, I'm calling the police." The moving light didn't seem to react to that, so I just sat there, in my hotel room, watching it until it stopped. The next night it happened again, and the next. Now I've shown the footage to my colleagues and they are convinced I have a ghost. I've asked the pet sitter to look around the house for footprints in the snow and nothing. I finally get home and nothing is out of place, but now I realize that I have to sleep in this house with the weird moving light, so when the sun went down I was desperately trying to figure out what it was. 2 days later I did. This is kind of hard to explain, but bear with me. This was a very bad winter and I had taken the internet's advice and thrown pantyhose filled with rock salt up into my gutters to prevent ice dams. The string hanging down from one of them had an ice crystal on it, and that little ice crystal was blowing in the breeze and reflecting the driveway lights back into the house. So, absolutely not creepy at all, but when you're away from home and see a floating orb in your house, it will give one the willies for sure. We rented a house that never felt like home. You always felt creeped out walking in there, like you were being watched. My BF and our roommate both worked nights, so I would be there by myself a lot. One night I was doing my usual stuff and watching some TV before bed. I had this overwhelming feeling all night that I should avoid the hallway and not look directly down it. It was creepy. The feeling of being watched and terrified lasted about 2 hours before I decided to suck it up and make my way to my room. I left the hallway lights on and went to bed. Just as I turned to the side table light, I heard a drawer being pulled out and hitting the stopper. I turned on the light and nothing was out of place. This went on about 6 times before I decided I was sleeping with the light on. I curled up under the covers and waited for the BF to get home. He comes rolling in about 3 a.m. He's laughing at me for being such a pussy, gets into bed and turned the light off, and that's when all hell broke loose. All the doors down the hallway slammed shut one by one, then our closet doors started rattling. The sound coming from inside could only be described as total destruction. It sounded like the shelves, the pole, and everything in there was being tossed around. The BF joined me under the covers and we were both terrified. After it stopped, it took 5 to 10 minutes to convince him to go check around the house. Nothing was out of place, and our roommate had drove 3 hours back home that night to be with his family, so we knew it wasn't him. We slept with the light on the rest of the night and moved out soon after. I still can't drive by that house without being creeped out. I was a vehicle mechanic in the Army Reserves when I was younger. On one overnight drill we drove a convoy of trucks from Baltimore to Fort A.P. Hill, Virginia on the old state highways. Things started out pretty normally, but as we were driving, the convoy gradually starts slowing down, and after a while the whole line of trucks has slowed to a crawl. We pulled off the road and the guy in the lead truck tells us his 5-ton won't accelerate at all. We switched trucks and sure enough, it won't go above 5 miles per hour. I dropped the truck out of the convoy and my motor sergeant stayed with me in a pickup truck. About a half hour later we happen across an old gas station and decide that we are not going anywhere fast, so we will park the truck there. I was to remain with the truck until they could come back later and transfer everything to another one. So off drives my motor sergeant and I am out in the middle of southern bumfuck Maryland with nobody around. It starts getting dark and I see the lights are on and the restaurant is open at the gas station, and I am hungry as hell, so in I go. I sit down in a booth by the window where I can keep an eye on the truck, and a lady comes and asks me what I want to eat. I ask if I can have a menu and she says she doesn't have one, but they have fried chicken and mashed potatoes, and that sounded pretty good to me, so I order it. I was starving hungry and it was the best damn fried chicken I have ever eaten. I finish, get the bill, leave my money on the table and walked back out to the truck. I stayed awake for a while, but eventually I laid down across the seat and slept a few hours. Now about 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, Another truck shows up with a bunch of guys and we start transferring gear to the other 5-ton. One of the guys says you must be starving and I say no, I ate at the restaurant. Well, this guy gives me the strangest look and says you didn't eat at that restaurant. Look at it. Well, it's the middle of the night and I can't see the building that well and I just told him he was crazy and we leave. I slept a couple hours and then we had to go back in the morning to deal with this broke down truck and that's when I had a WTF moment. All the windows to this station are boarded up and the place looks like it had been abandoned for 20 years. At this point I am seriously weirded out so I go over and peek through the glass on the door which was uncovered. My fucking money was still sitting on the table. I couldn't get away from that place fast enough. I preface this by saying that I am not religious and I do not believe in the paranormal. That said, it was the month of November and I was visiting Edinburgh, Scotland. It was cold and I was layered in a long-sleeved shirt, sweatshirt, and winter jacket. In the evening, my friends and I decided to go on one of the haunted walking tours that takes you through the vaults beneath the city. They are, of course, rumored to be haunted by the poor, destitute, and deplorable people who died gruesome deaths therein. One underground vault is said to house a particularly demonic spirit. It is said to be trapped within the confines of a circle of stone built by Wiccans to protect the living from its unfettered evil. While standing alongside the stone circle, my friend, who herself is Wiccan, began chanting barely intelligibly under her breath. I suddenly felt a flurry of wind at my neck. Then, nails dug deeply into the flesh of my back and dragged down my body from my shoulders to my waist. I was completely frozen in fear, too shook to scream although I was filled with white-hot pain. I spent the rest of the tour petrified and when we emerged from the tunnels I ran over to the bathroom of a pub where I pulled off all my clothes, which themselves were perfectly intact, only to see bright red marks lining the naked skin of my back. I've told my friends and family this story and they think it should be enough for me to cave and believe in the supernatural. I still don't, but I also can't explain what happened in those tunnels underground. There was a girl I worked with that was super weird. Like randomly singing weird. She had some kind of infatuation with me, I guess because I drove her to work sometimes. She randomly quit and I forgot about her. About 2 months later, I start smelling something strange in my apartment. Then it gets worse, to the point it's unbearable. Shortly after, I get a knock on my front door. I open it up and it's a police officer. He tells me that someone died in the apartment above me and had been rotting for weeks. He wanted to ask me some questions obviously. Turns out it was that girl. She apparently moved in there in those 2 months. Even worse, they said she put me down as her referral and emergency contact. I had no idea. Even stranger was that I never told her where I lived. Stranger even was a couple weeks before this I had a situation where I woke up in the middle of the night. I was completely paralyzed and heard whispering. I felt like I was being held down. After researching it later, I figured it was just sleep paralysis, which I've never experienced. Now, I'm not sure it wasn't something related to her dying in the apartment above. Super weird. I'll still never forget that smell. My fiancé and I decided to go camping. When we were getting the camping permit, we were told the first night we were staying was going to be packed with people, but the second night was going to be only us at the campground. One thing to mention is we always choose a campsite that has a single entrance that we can block off with the car for safety. The first night goes without a hitch. The second night rolls around. We were sitting around the fire as it started to die around 3 a.m. We're about 2 seconds away from going into the tent when a man with a headlamp on shows up and is trying to get around my car into our campsite. The headlamp shining at us blocked the view of the top half of his body. My fiancé walks up to see what he wants, and the guy asks if we hear the loud music playing from the bar down the road. My fiancé gets about a foot away from him, then does a complete about face and makes a beeline for where we have our gun, but doesn't grab it. I joke with the guy, saying, "Yeah, it's just great." He said, "If they're doing it to annoy me, I'll be set free. Do you understand?" I try to joke with him again, but he cuts me off and says, "No. If they are doing it to annoy me, I'll be set free. Do you understand?" I said, very clearly, "Yes, I understand." He says, "Good. That means no prison," and immediately walks away. I immediately call 911 as my fiancé hands me the gun while he literally throws everything unceremoniously into our car to leave. He tells me that, when he got close enough to see the man's face, his face was pure insanity, and that's why he turned immediately around to go for the gun. Right when we finished throwing everything into the car, the police showed up. They said they saw the man leaving the campsite and asked him what he was doing. He said he was very upset about the music and was asking anyone he found nearby if the music was bothering them before he went to the bar to ask them to turn the music down. As semi-reasonable as this sounded, the cop said, he was not normal. There was something very wrong with him. We're glad you called, and we were advised to leave the area if we were able to. It was the single scariest moment of our lives and we haven't been camping since. When I was around 14, my family went on a vacation to Connecticut. One night there wasn't much to do, so my dad decided to take us on a ghost tour. It was one of those large group night excursions. Anyway, nearing the end of the tour we're at a church and my sister, who is a year older, starts freaking out saying she sees a man in black with a cowboy hat and spurs and he is pacing up and down the upper balcony and not one of us sees what the hell she's talking about. So she's panicking and crying and we take her out and that's the end of that. So I think. Few years later we're in Salem, we go on another ghost tour because ever since that one we did I got really into the paranormal and occult. Anyway, we're now at another church, mind you this is years later and in a different state. My sister looks up again, freaking out, man in black, cowboy hat, spurs. This time she sees he's sad and looks like he's playing out some loop of a funeral. My sister starts describing this event. When the tour guide cuts her off and says, oh, you're talking about so and so. He's mourning his wife and child who died en route to Connecticut. Seriously, my heart stopped and I froze solid. My sister never mentioned the time she saw him years earlier. She 100% can see dead people. You'll believe whatever she says. My junior year in high school, my best friend's father remarried. He'd lost his wife the year before after a long illness, but quickly found a new love. My best friend, whom I'll call Ray, suddenly had a bunch of stepsisters. They were all encouraged to do bonding activities, which is how I found myself dragged along on a camping trip over Labor Day weekend, just a bunch of girls, a tent, and a portable grill. All names have been changed for their privacy. Ray's older, biological sister, Kitty, was a college freshman and she borrowed the family van. Ray and I had our licenses, but weren't allowed to drive the van. With us were their stepsisters, Cindy, who was slightly younger than me, and Ray, Susan, 14, and Jamie, 12. We live in Utah, at least I still do, and there are a lot of beautiful mountains and forests to go camping in. I don't know where exactly we went, but I think it was up Provo Canyon towards the back of the Wasatch Mountains. It might have been Spanish Fort Canyon. All I really remember is that it involved a lot of switchbacks on the narrow, two-lane road, and the higher we went, the foggier it got. Now, fog in Utah isn't unheard of during the winter. But for the first week of September, which is usually just as hot as early August, it's pretty damned odd. The higher we went, the darker it got, even though it was only late afternoon on a Friday. Kitty drove slowly because of the road conditions, and it took us well over an hour to get to the campsite. We weren't actually roughing it that much. It was a dedicated site with light posts and on-site bathrooms that were little more than glorified outhouses that also happened to have pretty rudimentary sinks. We set up the tent, which wasn't easy as none of us had done it before. We were, after all, a group of teenage girls on our first solo camping trip. It took at least an hour to get the thing set up. By then, it was dark. Kitty got the little grill going and we made hot dogs. Then we piled into the tent and into our sleeping bags. It was lightly drizzling by this time, but the tent was supposed to be waterproof. I fell asleep fairly quickly. I'm still not sure what woke me. I don't remember any specific sound, just that I was suddenly wide awake, in the dark, with Jamie on one side of me and Cindy on the other. Everyone else was still asleep. The light from the post about 20 yards away, indicating where the bathrooms were, glowed through the nylon of the tent. Then I heard a crunch of gravel. We weren't the only campers at the site. There were at least 4 other families there, which was why we'd chosen to stop at this particular one. Safety in numbers and all that. Safety in numbers. I was still blinking at the light shining through the tent wall when a shadow stepped in front of it. I couldn't see much, just the blobby outline of a figure. I judged it to be average human male in size. The hand pressed to the tent wall was much crisper. I stared at the hand for what felt like an eternity. It was probably only 10 or 15 seconds before I nudged Candy. She jerked awake, and I clapped my hand over her mouth, just pointed to the shadow outside. She did the same to Ray, and Ray to Kitty. By the time Kitty woke, the figure had moved. But not away. It walked along the side of the tent, fingers dragging over the nylon with a little worse sound, impossibly loud in the choked silence around us. Footsteps in the dirt outside. My heart pounding in my ears. The hand reached the corner. The sound stopped and the shadow disappeared. I let out a held breath. The scratch of fingernails on nylon started up 6 inches behind my head, just 4 feet or so up. This time, it didn't stop when it reached the corner. Around the 10th, the shadow went, circling, pausing in the light as if knowing we were awake and watching its silhouette. Twice, 3 times. 6 times, the figure circled the tent, fingers dragging constantly on the material. I don't know how long it took before it left. The 4 of us lay in terrified silence for hours, even after we thought it had gone. I do know I was the last to fall back asleep, still waiting for that thin shrill of friction on the flimsy green fabric keeping it separate. The second time I woke, it was to find that it was daylight. And that the ceiling of the tent hung a foot above my face, the waterproof tarp gone and the material slashed, soaked with rainwater and the sun shining in my eyes. I admit fully that I peed a little when I realized it had been cut. Our blankets and sleeping bags were already soaked, so it wasn't as if anyone would notice. I don't think I was alone in that, either. We were all very subdued as we hurried, one by one, to the bathrooms to dress. No one mentioned to the younger girls what had happened. Kitty lied and said that the storm had ripped the tent. Since it was damaged anyway, takedown was a lot faster. We were a lot more motivated, too. We skipped breakfast and hauled ass out of the campsite. The drive back down the mountain was one of the most tense I've ever experienced. Their father didn't believe us when we told him about the man outside the tent. He grounded everyone but Kitty for a week for ruining the tent through our supposed incompetence in taking it down. I wasn't allowed to visit for 2 weeks, though I saw Ray at school. My parents bought a new tent last week. They set it up in the backyard. It's a fancy thing that just pops up, with a pole like an umbrella. I stepped inside it, and had a flashback to those black fingers, light shining between them like some macabre lunar eclipse. Almost 20 years, and that sound still gives me panic attacks. So no, I won't be camping again. Ever. So I went camping with some buddies a few years ago. We decided to go on our spring break in high school and take as few items as we possible could because we are young and dumb. We went to one of my friend's dad's land and decided to hike the first day until we found a good spot. We found one probably about 3 hours in and set up shop. Now I don't recall what everyone else brought, but I know I brought a sleeping bag, a machete, hiking boots plus clothes. No one brought food because we wanted to hunt to eat like some real men to be young again. Everything went surprisingly well the first 2 nights. We managed to kill a few rabbits and a snake. We're all sitting around the campfire at night pretty drunk when we heard it. A loud long deep howl. We all stopped and looked at each other for a few moments and then a chorus of howls began. They were all around us. I asked my friend if he thought it was coyotes or wolves. He said that he has heard of them having coyotes out there before, which PFFT. Big deal if it's coyotes, but the howls were so deep. He had his cell phone, so he called his dad and his dad told us that there had been some sightings of wolves in the last few weeks. Now typically wolves will leave you alone, but we were all drunk, didn't have a tent and horrified we were going to be eaten by these wolves. We stayed up the whole night to keep an eye out, and the closest we heard was rustling behind the bushes and the glow of eyes behind the tree line. So horrifying, honestly. Thankfully we all survived and hiked as fast as we could back to civilization. A few years back I lost my wedding ring somewhere outside my house, and although I searched for hours at my job and in the car, trying my hardest to avoid having to tell my wife, I was never able to find the ring. Eventually I had to make the call, and just accept the loss. So I told my wife, bought a new ring and moved on. In the months following that incident, my wife and I had our first child and also decided to move into a new house, seeing as we needed the space. When we moved we bought all new furniture to spruce up our new place. Fast forward a couple of months, my wife and I are sitting on the couch and watching TV. It is worth mentioning that I am wearing nothing but my boxers. And there is no one in the house other than my wife, my 2-month-old daughter, in her baby swing, and me. I get up to get a soda. I was gone maybe 25 seconds in all. When I got back to my seat to sit down, dead center of my cushion is the wedding ring I had lost several months prior. Again, I had no clothing on that it could have fell out of. It was a new couch and house completely, so it wasn't tucked away inside that. Also, my wife was the only person in the house old enough to move or be present when I had lost the ring. So of course I pick the ring up, and say to my wife something along the lines of, "Hey, you found my ring?" And she asks what I'm talking about. So I explain where I found it. She at this time starts to say repeatedly, "Are you fucking with me?" To which I answer honestly that I am not. She then begins hyperventilating and crying. Deathly afraid of what just happened. I still have no idea how my ring could have shown up. Or how it could have been positioned so neatly on the cushion I was sitting on just moments prior. And I have no doubt my wife is just as clueless, seeing as that stuff scares her to death. And also, I lost the ring somewhere completely independent of her, the couch, the house, and the clothing I was wearing at the time. Where I live, there's an urban myth about this bridge that's about an hour or so away from my house. The myth goes like so: years and years ago there was this little girl that would be dropped off at this bridge to swim under the creek every day while her parents worked on their farm. One day, she drowned in the creek, never to be seen or heard of again. It sounds like classic BS, right? I thought the same. Legend has it, if you drive to this bridge, park your car on it, cut your lights and engine and then honk 3 times, the little girl will come to your car, doing a multitude of things to gain entrance. Supposedly, this is how her parents would notify her that they had returned to pick her up. Anyway, my friends and I heard of this myth, and we thought it sounded absolutely ridiculous. There's no possible way this could be real. So we drove the hour it took to get to this bridge at about 2 in the morning. We arrived at the bridge, parked our car on it, and cut the engine along with the lights. My friend who was driving honked the horn 3 times and we sat in the pitch black darkness, eagerly waiting to disprove this silly story. A few minutes passed and nothing happened, and just as we were ready to give up, we all heard the sound of something tapping against metal, and it came from the roof of the car. Immediately we freaked out and got the hell out of there. We were trying to come up with logical reasons as to why we heard that noise, but couldn't really come up with anything. We stopped at a nearby gas station to refill the tank for the ride home, but before any of us got out of the car, my friend yelped. I turned to him, and he was pointing at his window, and there was a small handprint there, too small to be any of ours. Regardless of that, I still took it as him trying to mess with me, and went to wipe it off as if to say nice try, except when I did, the handprint was still there. The handprint was put on the window from the outside. And that wasn't the only handprint. Every single mirror of the car had handprints on them, even the side mirrors, all the same size and shape as the first one we discovered. Suffice to say, I'm never going back to that bridge. Well, the creepiest thing just happened to me 2 days ago. 4 days after we moved to a new house, I misplaced my phone. I used my mother's phone to call my phone and find it. My phone is always on silent vibrate mode, so it took me 4 missed calls to finally found my phone. I forgot that I left it on the floor next to the main door when I was putting the shoes on the shoebox. The creepy thing starts and ends at the first call that I made to find my phone. Normally after a few rings the operator would come up and say that the phone I am calling is unreachable and to leave a message after the beep or something like that, so I was waiting for it to make my second call, but after just a few rings on my first call the ringing stopped, almost like someone answered the call. I looked at my mom's phone and saw that the time is running, which means someone picked up the call and then I am talking to someone. I quickly put the phone back to my ears and then I heard the creepiest unhumanly whisper-like sound that I have ever heard in my life. It only lasted a few seconds then went quiet but did not hang up the phone. The call was still running, so I asked, "Hello, who is this?" "Hello," but there was nothing but silence, so I hang up and called again. This time after a few rings the operator comes up and said the things they usually say. I tried calling 2 more times but it is back to normal and nothing weird from usual happened before I found my phone. Then I looked at my phone and there was 4 missed calls and 1 voicemail. I listened to the voicemail expecting for it to be my voice where I was saying, "Hello, who is this? Hello?" But no, the one that was on the voicemail was the exact same creepy voice/sound that I heard trying to call my phone. I have the voicemail saved for anyone curious, just do not know how to upload. I was always the skeptical, still am. I was not creeped out at the time, I am more like excited, and with a huge smile on my face I told my mom that something someone might call paranormal happened to me for the first time. I am still amazed about this until someone can debunk this experience, of course. People don't really believe this happened to me, but I know what I saw. It was paranormal, but for some reason it did not creep me out. I had a very calming feeling about the whole experience at the time, but I was like WTF the day after. So I was laying in bed, I must have been 14 or so, while living with my dad in our small apartment. The layout was basically a rectangle with 2 windows on either side of the front door. That's where the living and kitchen were, then my bedroom and the bathroom, then his bedroom and a balcony. My bedroom did not have doors, it was just 3 walls and the bathroom was in front. Basically my bed faced the bathroom, and there were no windows on the side of the house. We lived in the 3rd floor of a gated building. Anyway, my dad is in the bathroom and I'm laying in bed to go to sleep, and suddenly a light fades in on the wall as if there is someone from my bed shining a flashlight. Slowly a silhouette appears and it's the upper body of a young man and it's just looking at me. I shouted out at my dad calmly that I am seeing a shadow, and he just goes, "No, you're not, go to sleep." Meanwhile I'm just staring at this thing and it just slowly fades away. I was really confused since no one could enter our building without a key. There was no way anyone could be outside. There was no way the angles work with the windows to shine light like that. None of it made sense. I never saw that again, but I will never forget it.